Okay, in the interest of getting everybody back to their families quickly tonight, welcome everyone to tonight's presentation on financial aid. It's being sponsored by the Yorktown PTSA in partnership with Yorktown High School Guidance. So welcome everyone. We encourage you to join the PTA or make a donation so that we can continue to offer programs such as this to our students as well as our families. Just simply point the camera on your phone to the QR code that you see on your screen and it will take you directly to the online membership and donations page. And your support and contribution and membership are always very, very much appreciated. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Tonight's presentation is being recorded. A link to the recording along with any additional resources will be emailed to everyone that registered, even those that were not able to join us in person tonight. And there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So we encourage you to type in any questions you may have during the presentation into the Q&A box. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Cindy Cervini, the head of guidance at Yorktown High School. Cindy.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mrs. Tomini. We really appreciate, the guidance office really appreciates all that the PTSA is doing for us this year. You had Peter Van Buskirk a few weeks ago. Tonight, we're really happy to have Dr. Linda Sheridan with us. You know, in the past, we've had Michael Turner, who works for HESC, and Michael is amazing. But Michael has little kids, and although he knows a lot about financial aid, and of course he works for higher educational services, he hasn't felt the pain that those of us who have filed for financial aid and tried to get financial aid and have had kids going through the college process. He has not felt our pain. But Dr. Sheridan not only has felt the pain, she decided to be altruistic and help us through the pain. So I really appreciate having her with us this evening. She'll probably be able to tell us some more stories that, you know, that Michael won't be able to share with us for another 13 or 14 years. So Dr. Sheridan is a certified financial aid consultant, and I'm really anxious to hear her presentation tonight because I think it will give us a lot of options as parents. So thank you, Dr. Sheridan.
My pleasure. Ready to go? Okay.
All set.
Perfect. Am I on screen? PowerPoint up? Great. Okay, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Hi to everybody, welcome. My name is Linda Sheridan, and as you can see from this slide, I'm a physician, albeit a retired one. And just for some background, I was in a group practice for a long time, and my group got bought out by one of the big companies, and so I got the fortunate enough to have the opportunity to stay home with my kids. One who graduated from Boston College, although the ceremony was 1.5 years late, and one who goes to Skidmore, both reputable schools. And because of my kids, I learned the hard way, unfortunately, how this whole financial aid system works. And it was for this reason I started, my slides going, my company, College for Less Consulting. It's a company whose mission statement is to pretty much help families make it through the whole college financial aid process without losing their minds and with getting the most money possible. When my older daughter got accepted to her #1 school, BC, I was like most people and was in complete sticker shock. The number we were expected to kick in was way more than I expected, and I wasn't sure how I was going to pay for it. Use up the nest egg, use up the retirement portfolio, student loans, had no idea. And this is why I realized that I didn't want anyone else to go through what I went through and started my company. I wanted to help families through the whole process. And so tonight, we're going to talk about what I like to call Financial Aid 360, the forms, and we're going to go over the 10 essential things you need to be thinking about financial aid and the forms, because in this process, even simple mistakes can cost you a lot of money. I know your time's important, so tonight's talk will be about 25 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. And before we get started, just so you know that tonight's the night for you. If you're worried about not having any of the time for any of this, if you're stressed about how you're going to pay for it, or you're so confused like I was that you don't even know where to start. And so to start, what you should know is that, in fact, only about 25% of people actually pay the full cost of college. And what that means is 75% don't. The average financial aid package is about 52%. But I was talking to someone the other day, and they thought the number was actually closer to 60% for the last year or two. So that's a lot of money out there. You should also be aware that most aid goes to people in the top 25% of income. And so it's always a possibility to get some financial aid. Other things to know is that currently there's about $1.6 trillion in student debt out there, and that on average on only about 30% of students graduate in 4 years. I give you these two pieces of information not to depress you, but because you don't want to be in either one of these categories. And also another thing to consider when you look at colleges, you want to know what their 4-year graduation rates are, because adding an extra year on just adds on more problems and more money. And most parents really don't want to inflict student loan debt on their kids. So make sure you know what those numbers are. Just so you know, the low graduation rate and a lot of the debt are mostly in the public schools and the for-profit schools. So if you're going down that path in terms of the possible schools, just be aware you might want to know what those numbers are. As an FYI to that a little bit, you should also know that the average student loan debt after 4 years is about $30,000. So just keep that number in mind as well. And so you know, don't necessarily look at your financial advisor or your accountant to get help with student loans with financial aid. They're not necessarily trained in it. They don't really have the background for that. I recently had a new client who told me that she went to her financial advisor for help, and he said he paid someone, which I thought was pretty funny. What you don't want to do is you don't want to go it alone. You want to get some help if you can. Help can help you save tons of time, possibly get you thousands more, and maybe reduce the stress level. One thing to know is that once you submit the forms, they're actually really hard to change. So you want to make sure that everything's correct the first time. So before we get started, big question is, what is financial aid? And it's a combination of grants and scholarships, which is free money, and loans, which have to be paid back. And there's also sometimes a work study option where they will allocate funds for your child to get a job. So whenever you're looking at any financial aid offer, it's important to keep in mind what's going to be free money, what's going to be debt, big differences. Lastly, what you do want to know is that there are changes coming to the forms. It keeps getting pushed back. And right now it's looking like it's going to stick for the 2024-2025 school year. So as we go through tonight, I'm going to point out some of the spots where that's going to be changing and how that might impact you for financial aid. And so now let's go over the 10 essential things. And the first thing, it's simple, know the forms. And there are basically two forms you should know, the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Like I said, basically only two, because even though you need to know these two forms, it's important to also check the schools you're looking at have other forms, which many do. Just make sure you're aware of that when you're looking at schools. And so the first form is the FAFSA, which, as the name is, Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's the form required by the federal government. It's free. It's required by all schools. It's about 100 questions. Uses this fun formula to calculate what your aid's going to be. I know it's a crazy formula. The other form, the CSS profile, is required by about 400 schools. It's much more complicated. It's about 13 pages long and has about 200 questions. It's how you apply for school-based aid, and it's required by most of the private colleges, particularly the ones here in the Northeast. It's currently free if your income is less than $45,000 per year, but for everyone else, it's $25 for the first school and then $16 for each school after that. I tell you that just so you know, with more kids applying to more and more colleges, the CSS profile fees can add up. So just keep an eye on that. One of the changes that's coming is that they're moving it to being free for people who make income less than $100,000 a year. So that's one of the good changes that's going to be happening 24-25. Okay, those are the two forms. But before further, you need to know is the big thing that people get upset about is that the forms don't care where you live. If you live in New York and you make $100,000 per year, you're expected to contribute the same amount if you live in Kentucky and make $100,000 a year. Sadly, this isn't one of the things that's going to change. And I just pointed out there because sometimes you'll see people talking about that. The essential thing number 2 is knowing what the forms calculate. And this is really important. So if you take home only 1 or 2 things tonight, this part of the talk is one of the things that I think is most important for people to know. And the thing that it calculates is something called your EFC, which stands for your expected family contribution. It's what the federal government and the schools think that you should be able to pay each year for school. And each form, the FAFSA and the CSS profile, get to this number differently. But a good rule of thumb for the EFC is that it's a combination of 30% of the parent's income, 5% of any parent assets, money in things like savings accounts or stock portfolios, and 25% of the student assets, any money in the student's name. These are all important differences. Where you have your money matters. When filling out the forms, it's important to try and get to the lowest expected contribution possible. You want to minimize what you have to pay. As you can tell from the formula, income is the biggest piece of the puzzle, the biggest part of the EFC, the 30%. Parents, particularly people who own their own business, can often do things to lower their income any year, and attention to be paid to that. When you're filling out the forms, the year that's most important is the year before the form should be completed. Since you want to fill out the forms in the fall of senior year, the year that's important in terms of income is the junior year of high school, which is 2 years before the student starts college. And the reason I bring this up is that in the lingo, that's called the prior year. And I throw this out not to confuse you, but just to let you know about it, because you might have seen this phrase thrown out about. So if you currently have a senior applying to college, it's the 2020 tax year that's important. And that's 2 years before they start school in the fall of 2022. And just so you know, you'll probably be filling the forms out again next year. So what you earn this year is going to play a role for that, that filing. So I know this is confusing, but it's important to understand the concept of the VFC and how you get to it. It's the thing that everything else is based on. So just keep that in mind. The other thing to know, and perhaps just as important as understanding the EFC, is understanding how much money you actually are going to need in order to pay for college. And that need is important to understand. And so what I want you to know is you need to look at a financial aid profile of a school this way, is that there's something called, there's the cost of admission, which is tuition, room and board, and a whole bunch of other fees. And if you take out the EFC, where you're expected to contribute, then you're left with the need. And you want to know about this need because a lot of schools, so this need is how much you're actually going to need in addition to the EFC to get the bill paid for. And lots of schools have lots of money, but lots don't. Each one, however, will meet a different percentage of this need. And this is perhaps the second and most important thing tonight. And the second thing I want you to take home. And that's because some schools meet 100% of this need, some 90%, and some none. So what that looks like is this. If you had a school that cost $50,000 and your EFC was calculated to be $20,000, then you're left with a need of $30,000. And when you're looking at a school, as you see here, you want to know what percentage that need they meet, because if they meet 100% need, they will give you in financial $30,000, and you will have left a balance of zero. If the school only meets 50% of that need, they will be giving you $15,000, but you will have to somehow come up with another $15,000. If they meet 10% of that need, then they'll only give you $3,000, and you have to come up with another $27,000. And how to fund this need different. A lot of people do HELOCs or other type of parent student loan kind of things. But again, when you're looking at a school, you want to know what percentage of need, because this other number can get very scary at times. I had a client who paid no attention to the EFC and no attention to what percentage of need was met. And because of that, our son got dead set on going to a very expensive school that only met 50% of need.
Excuse me, Dr. Sheridan. One of our parents asked in regards to the EFC, I just want to ask you this before we get too far away from it. Does 25% of the student's assets include any 529 savings, or does that fall under 5% of the parent's assets?
Very good question. I'll get to that in a minute, but the answer is 529 is a parent asset, fortunately. So it would be the 5%, not the 25%. That's one of the benefits of the 529 plan, but a good question. Anything else? So yeah, I had one client who called me a bit terrified because she paid no attention to the EFC and made no attention to the percent need. And her son got very excited about a school, but the school only gave them about $20,000 in financial aid. They were left with a $30,000 need, and the school didn't meet any of it. And so she was like, how am I going to send my kid there? I can't afford to take out a $30,000 HELOC or student or parent loan, and I have 3 other kids. So please pay attention to these 2 numbers when looking at schools. There are a lot of schools out there. There's a lot of schools that have a lot of money. So you don't really want to have your student dead set on a school that's really going to bankrupt the family.
Quick question coming in. The percentage of income, is that the gross income or net?
It would be adjusted gross income.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, some other changes are coming. So that's the concept of the EFC and how the schools get to it. Concept of need and what percentage of need a school meets. Those to me are like the 2 big things of the take home tonight. And they're really 2 of the things you need to keep on the brain when looking at different schools. There is a big change coming to the FAFSAs, like I said, in 24, 25. But one of the things that's going to change, and I'm just going to point it out because I know, I think Lisa, you said your kids were close in age, and the rules are going to change, not for the better. Currently, if you had 1 child in college, the EFC that you would pay is the 1 full EFC. If you had 2 children in school, that EFC would be split between each child, so half to one, half to the other. If you have 3 children, it would be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, with the total being 1 total EFC. The changes that are coming down the pike, at least the way it's reported now, is that that's going to go away. And what it's going to be is 1 full EFC for 1 child, 1 for the second, 1 for the third, for a total of 3 EFCs. They kept talking about trying to make the forms easier and student financial aid more easy for families. This change is going to take away that. So I just pointed out in case you have your children are pretty close in age and they'll be in college at the same time. I don't want you to have that sticker shock in 24, 25. But hopefully they'll get rid of this change. But back to the formula, and I guess what some people are coming at is that, and the child asset, unfortunately, if you thought you were smart in saving some money for your child, it comes back to haunt you with it being assessed at 25% per year. I call this the no good deed goes unpunished rule. But don't get too upset with that number. There are things that can be done to lower this number as well and change things to a parent asset. So as you can see from this so far, how much you make and where you have your money are the things that need to be constantly on the brain. And given the prior rule, you need to think of it at least when your child is a high school junior, if not earlier. As with most college things, the sooner you do stuff, the better, whether it's deciding which schools to visit, understanding a school's profile, or thinking about your finances. You should note that in terms of assets, they only have to be accurate as of the day you fill the forms. So there are some ways you can legally move money around. So you can do that if appropriate, and then the next day file the form, and that's all legitimate. Again, it only has to be accurate in terms of the assets as of the day the forms were filed. Okay, I know this is all a bit wonky, but very important. You need to the EFC, what percentage to meet, and you should always be thinking about income and assets. Which brings up number 3, which don't mix up the assets, meaning don't report as a child asset that's a parent's asset. And if you remember from that slide, a parent is 5% and the child is 25%. An example to show you why knowing this is important is that, say you had $100,000 and it was a parent asset, it would only be the 5% rule, which is 5% per year. If it was a child asset, it'd be 25% per year.
Okay, Dr. Sheridan, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but this seems like a good time to ask this question. One parent said, I have an early retirement account for my child. Does this fall under my 2% or his 5%? My 25% or his 5%?
What kind of account is it?
It's called an early retirement account.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've never heard of that either. So perhaps the person that that asked that question could be a little bit more specific. I didn't hear about that either. So
the question would be: is the child name as a beneficiary?
Well, we'll have to wait until we get more information from this parent. So I'm sorry. Keep going.
Okay, that's fine. Interesting question. And when talking about child assets, I'm pretty much talking about anything of substance that might be in some sort of saving or custodial account, like a UTMA or UGMA. And I mean more than the small out that they save from a summer job. I think there's up to the first $6,000 the child earns is protected, so it wouldn't be assessed at that number. So someone brought up the 529 plan. And for anyone who's not familiar with 529 plans, they're a way to save for college that has some tax benefits. Here in New York, in addition to the federal benefits, there are also New York state tax benefits. Knowing what those benefits are can potentially save you at least $300 a year. You should also know that both regular 529 plans and custodial 529 plans are both parent assets, and therefore assessed at only the 5% per year, not the 25%. And just so you know, if you currently have money saved in your child's name, there are some things you can do to legally move it from a child asset to a parent asset. And these are things that I often talk about with people. If you don't currently have a 529 plan, and if you're in a position after trying everything else to have to pay for a part of the cost of college, it can be in your benefit to currently open one and immediately save some money. They're a good way, at least in New York, to save a couple of $100 a year off your New York state income taxes. So it's not a benefit. New Jersey doesn't have that benefit. I think Connecticut does, but as well has it as well as New York, but not New Jersey. As I pointed from a previous slide, there are certain assets that are exempt and don't count towards your EFC. And those are your primary residence, your any retirement accounts, any annuities that you might have, or any cash value life insurance policies. So they don't count towards the cost of attendance, and you just keep that in mind. You don't want to tell them something that they don't want to hear. So remember that these are exempt and from the forms. Okay, what's up next? Number 5. Oh, the other thing I want to say is if you have a second home, like a vacation home or a rental property, that goes under the 5% rule. So, because it's a parent asset. The other thing that's important to know, if you're a business owner, is that a lot of people value their business wrong on the forms. It's really, the rules are strict on this, that there are some criteria that can allow you to value your business as 0, which is a really great thing. Also, just keep that in mind when filling out the forms. Number 6 is a bit more practical, and it's knowing the deadlines. And there are a million deadlines. There's ED1, ED2, regular decision, and financial aid deadlines. So yeah, you just make sure you stay on top of the deadlines, because that can bog you down. So just stay on top of it. A lot of people make spreadsheets. So if you're wonky about that kind of stuff, I've heard that that works really well. The other thing to know is number 7, and this is a really big one. It may seem obvious, but the most important thing here is to make sure you fill out the forms. Everyone should do it, and don't do it and you miss out possibly on a ton of money. Believe it or not, at every year, up to about 40% of eligible families don't file, and so that every year there's $175 billion in financial aid left on the table. You don't want to be the one missing out. And even if you don't think you'll qualify for need-based aid, it's still important to fill out the forms for 2 other reasons. One is that you might qualify for merit aid, which is financial aid for smart kids to try and get them to come to a given school. Colleges want high quality students. It makes them look better in the rankings. And so they're often willing to give students money just to come. And this is how high income families get student aid. And believe it or not, but every year there are a lot more merit aid awarded than need-based given out. You should also know that by not filling them out, you possibly lose out on your chance of getting in. And college is really a business, and schools want students that can help with the bottom line. So students that fill out the forms for the full pay are sometimes given a leg up on getting in. So get the forms filled out. Number 8 is something I get asked about all the time, and it's the issue of appeals. And knowing that a financial aid offer that a school makes is not necessarily its final offer. There's often a lot of wiggle room to ask for more money. Schools often build this into any package they offer, and this is how I went from getting pretty much 0 with my first child to getting over $40,000 per year with my second daughter. It's important to know how to write these letters, and actually because of COVID issues, right now might be a really good time for an appeal. Schools are worried about students taking gap years. Another thing to know about appeals is that you shouldn't commit to any one school before you know all the financial aid offers that you got. Different schools, especially the private ones, offer up different financial aid packages, and you shouldn't be sending in your deposit until you have all offers in hand. If one school offers a lot and another nothing, if the schools compete with each other for students, that's something to put in the appeal. And what I'm talking about is like sending them a letter that says something like, John really wants to come to your school, but this other school would offer us more money. Can you match that? You can play one school off the other. Again, back to something we talked about in the beginning, and that is don't let your child all worked up over one school. Try to get them seriously interested in a few schools. That way you can find one that you can afford. When else should you follow an appeal? Well, other equally important things to know in terms of appeals is that you also have a really good case to do it if you had some big change in circumstances. And what I mean is something like a change in income to a job loss, which is unfortunately very common these days, and something like really large medical bills. If you can document that it's usually a great reason to file an appeal. I've had good luck with these types of letters, so it's always an option. The other thing to know about appeals is don't be scared to do it. Schools expect it, and they aren't going to take back any money that they offered you just because you asked for more. They don't do that. So don't be scared to do an appeal, just do it nicely. Number 9 is a question I know that a lot of people have an issue with, and that's knowing which parent's information to use for the forms. I bring this up because this can be a complicated, especially if parents are separated, divorced, or remarried. Using the wrong parent's information is a mistake you don't want to make. This section is also one that's going to change on the new forms, and one that's actually not going to be a change for the worse. So just keep that in mind. Lastly, number 10, correct information. And this is about inputting social security numbers right, spelling names right, putting the right numbers in the right spot. Every year, more than 5% of forms have wrong material inputted. And like I said earlier, it's a headache to go back in and fix it. So just make sure you take your time and fill everything in appropriately. Okay, so I know I've given you a lot of stuff. Those are the 10 things that I want you to know. And honestly, there are a lot more. A lot of pieces at play when you file financial aid. And so just think about things you can do to try and save a lot of money, not worrying about the time to complete and follow up the forms, and did your best to get as much money as possible. You can always schedule a call with me to see if I can help you. I can't help everybody, but if there is something I can do, we can work on that. And lastly, the only other thing I want to add before we summarize is that understanding all of this can often mean the difference between affording the private school your child wants or just sending them to a state school. Private schools have a lot more to offer in terms of financial aid. So very often the difference between the two is not, in terms of cost, is not as big as you might think. I had another client who only had their son apply to state schools, and they didn't know any of the things I talked about tonight, specifically the issue of what percentage of need a school meets. And they wound up with their son at a public school paying more than I did in sending my daughter to a private school. I tell you this to emphasize the importance of what it presented, especially the EFC, the percentage need, and trying to take a somewhat holistic approach to it in terms of getting your student to look at different schools. So in summary, you need to at least know the forms. You should also know the forms come out on October 1st. I bring this up because there's data that shows that people who fill out the forms in the first 3 months get more grant money than people who apply later. So I know there's a lot going on in the beginning of the school year, AP classes, tests, etc. But if you can, try and get to the forms. You also want to know what the forms calculate, and that's the EFC and the need. And I hope I got those across to you clearly. Then the next one is to make sure you have the asset listed appropriately, whether parent or with child. Know what the exempt assets are. Make sure we value your business exactly what it's worth, not more. What the deadlines are, and again, there's a lot of deadlines, so just keep that in your head. Please, please, please get the forms filled out. The FAFSA, CSS profile, any other institutional forms. You know, there's so much financial aid that I think the rule of thumb is for a family of 4, if they make up to about $180,000, they can qualify some either financial aid, need-based aid, or merit-based aid. So please get the forms filled out. The issue of appeals, when to do it, how to do it, always a good thing to keep in mind. Again, make sure you put in the correct parent. Incorrectly doing this can cost you some money, and make sure we use the correct information. So this is me. Just one other thing I wanted to get to. Cindy asked me about this earlier, and I didn't speak about it before, but it's about the New York State Excelsior program. And it's not what most of us thought it was going to be. And basically what it is if you apply for it through the higher education website, it can afford you up to about $5,500 per year for tuition to help make college more affordable. But again, the key thing though is that It's for tuition. It's not room and board. So it's available if you go to a SUNY or a CUNY school. So you'd be, if you qualified for it, the rule is you have to, for every year you take it, you have to work in New York State for a year. So for a typical undergrad, it would be for the 4 years. They can get $5,500 towards tuition for the fall, for 4 years of college. Tuition at SUNY is right now, I think low 7,000. So it can really help with that. But the key, and I keep saying this, is tuition. It doesn't count towards room and board. So if you had a student who wants to go away to school, it can help with tuition, but room and board's around $14,000 a year. So that still leaves a chunk of money that a family would be responsible for. So yes, it helps with tuition, but it doesn't help with room and board. And so unless you have a student who's going to stay at home, it makes it more affordable, but I wouldn't say that it puts it in the affordable category. So yeah, I hope I was clear about what I wanted to get across. I think it's essential to know these 10 things if you really want to get the most money possible. Cindy, I go back to you, see what questions we got. I know it went fast.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, having 2 homes, does that hurt us?
Well, like I said earlier, your primary residence is exempt. A second home is assessed at the 5% penalty.
Okay, great, great. Now, are business assets considered exempt?
Business assets are not considered exempt, but they're only relevant in terms of how you value your business. So it comes down to whether it's a family-owned business and how many employees does it have, because the rules are such that if it's more than 51% family-owned and you have less than 100 employees, the value is a 0.
Oh, okay, good to know. We are divorced.
I'm sorry, just make sure when you get to that question, it gets answered appropriately.
We are divorced. I am remarried, but her dad is not. So we have a higher household income, although he makes more income. Who should complete the FAFSA and CSS? How would we know?
The way the rule is written now is that the parent who has to fill it out is the parent with whom the student lives more than 51% of the time. So if your child lives with you, unfortunately, it's going to be your income and assets and their stepdad's income and assets that'll be asked about. That should be filled in on the form.
If you're expecting an increase in salary and bonus for the next couple of years and then it drops back to normal, like a deferred compensation, are there ways to divert the assets for filing?
Repeat that again.
Oh, okay. If you're, I just dismissed it. Hold on, let me see if I can do this. If you were receiving, if you had higher income over the next few years, increase in salary and bonus for the next couple of years, and then it drops down to normal, like a deferred compensation, are there ways to divert the assets for filing?
Not really. It's all depends on how you file it on your taxes. Depending on where your accountant puts it, because the input from the taxes gets directly inputted to the form. So it all depends on how your accountant will handle that.
Okay, all right. Can you repeat how much of the student's income is protected?
Up to about $6,500.
All right. Retirement accounts, such as 403B and 401Ks are exempt, but traditional IRAs and investment are not.
Any type of IRA is exempt. So that's considered a retirement account. So that gets exempt on the form. So it'd be 0. But if you have an investment account, that would be under the 5% rule as asset.
Okay, so I have a parent that is asking, when do students apply for merit aid?
Oh, it's the same form for need-based aid and merit aid. They're the same form. CSS profile, FAFSA. Okay.
Right, and I explained that a lot of colleges will send out scholarship information after a student has been accepted. So there's not exactly a place. I mean, they're going to use your FAFSA and they're going to use your profile, but in terms if your child is eligible for scholarship, they will let you know.
Yes.
Okay.
What'll happen is you apply to the schools, you fill out the financial aid forms, you apply to the school. Then when you get your acceptance letter, usually a week or so later, you'll get your financial aid award letter. So if they gave you any merit aid, it'll be in that letter that you get a week or so after your acceptance.
Right. Sometimes it takes a while to get your acceptance, and you wouldn't get your financial aid package until after the acceptance. Do the equations change when you have two colleges, when you have two students in college at the same time? And I think you went over that, that is changing next year. It used to be one EFC covered no matter how many children you had in at the same time. But now they're going to be changing that for the next few years. Mrs. Tomine, you missed that. It wasn't good news.
Yeah. Well, again, the change, these are what they're talking about changing. They've changed the rule. They've pushed it back once or twice already. So it's important to keep this on the mind, but who knows what's going to happen when they actually have to vote on it again. You know,
Okay.
maybe get delayed another year or two. But right now it's going to be for the 2024-25 school year.
Okay. If you make over 300,000, is it worth filing this form? I say yes. I vote yes.
I vote
Right?
yes too.
Okay.
Again, I don't know how many members there are in your family. The 180 number I quoted was for a family of 4. It goes up depending on how many children you have. But if you're, like I said, if you have a student who's a really great candidate, or if they think you're going to pay like 80%, they're going to toss you some merit aid to get you to come. So always fill out the form.
Does Social Security count towards income?
On the taxes, I believe it counts as income.
Oh, okay. And you know what I was hoping you might just explain briefly to the parents is how it works when you fill out the FAFSA, that you can actually have them access through the IRS your taxes from the prior year. I don't believe you explained that.
Sorry.
They're still doing that, right? They still give you the option so you don't have to try and figure out some of this information.
It's called the IRS data retrieval tool. It's called the DRT. And when you fill out the form, we'll be inputting things like, excuse me, your social security number. So once you have the social security numbers inputted, the form will give you the button to tick to have it uploaded directly from the IRS. So you can use the data retrieval tool to input a lot of the information.
I always found that really helpful. Okay, this one I forgot because it's been a while since I filed this. When filling out the forms, do the parents fill out the forms for the child, or does the child fill their own? I think there's some for the child to sign, and there's something and these are electronic signatures, and the parents fill out on their own, but the child does fill out something, right?
The child has to register and get their own ID number, but the parents get their own ID number as well. So parents usually fill out the form.
Right, but I think the child has to sign off.
Yeah, the kid has to sign off, but it's the parent who fills out the form.
That's always the way, right? Are SEPs, technically retirement accounts, also exempt?
Yes, an SEP, a self-employed pension plan, is considered a retirement account.
Okay, if I have money in my other child's name, not the college child, will that be counted as part of the FAFSA for the college child? I vote no.
I vote no too.
All right, good. I'm 2 for 2. Mrs. Romani, do you want to take up some of these questions? I'm trying to get the logistics down here.
Cindy,
Which
you're
one?
doing a great job. I'm gonna let you.
Okay.
It's rude to
Okay.
have like a black screen talking at you. I'll let you go through the Q&A. I can see some things in that have been thrown into the chat, and so I'll
Okay.
when the time's right.
Okay, yeah, it would be good if chat people could go on the Q&A so I don't have to go back and forth. What if one parent filled out the FAFSA already, but they are the custodial parent? Can you change it? But I think the custodial parent is supposed to be the one filling out the FAFSA, right?
I think that was a typo. I think it was, if they're not the custodial parent, can you change it?
Okay, well, that would make sense. Okay. Dr. Shannon?
If they're not the custodial parent, what do you want to change?
So it sounds like the non-custodial parent filled out the FAFSA.
Oh, yeah, that's one that gets people all the time. You can change it. It's a little difficult, but it's possible. You can do it. You just have to jump through a lot of hoops. See, that's one of the questions where right now it's actually a good benefit for the family for it to be the custodial parent. Because usually just because of the demographics, the custodial parent usually makes less than the non-custodial parent. But in the future, that question is going to revert to the parent who files the taxes with the child as a dependent. So right now it's custodial, but in the future it's going to the parent who claims the child on the taxes.
Okay, let's see. I just answered one on my own. All right. Is the child's IRA account exempt?
That's considered a child asset, it is considered a child asset.
Okay. Someone said great job. All right. If my child works and is filing his or her own tax return, can they fill out their own FAFSA and not rely on the parent's income? I vote no.
I vote no. If the child's a dependent, the child's a dependent. And
Yeah.
I would worry that if they're making that much, that it may subject them to a child's income, anything above that 6,500 or so is actually assessed at 50% per year. So just keep that in mind. Cindy got muted somehow. No, you're muted too, Lisa.
Sorry, she may have lost connection, so I'll kind of pick up. Somebody wanted to know, do they evaluate the financial aid every year, or is it just at the beginning of college?
No, you fill it out every year. That's why it's important. That's why it's important. Like what you're doing this year will count for next year's financial aid. So that's why I just wanted to point out you should always have it on the brain, because you're going to be filling out the forms 4 times, hopefully just 4 times.
What if you are divorced and have joint custody, but the biological father claims the child on their income tax return? Does it matter who claims the child?
Okay, Cindy, what's your guess on this one?
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me to guess. I don't think it matters. I think it's custodial is gonna fill out the FAFSA.
Exactly, it's the custodial parent.
Oh gosh, I'm exhausted now. Okay. All right, I think I can take this one. How do you find out what percentage of need a particular school meets? I think that the financial aid office, they're always advertising that. It doesn't mean that it's exact for everyone. They can tell you they meet 65% of need, but that's on average. How did I do?
I think you did pretty good. You can ask the school for the number, but again, keep that number on the brain. Don't let your students get so dead set on one school, because otherwise, if you wind up at a school with only meeting 10% in need, that's going to put a big headache on the family.
Regarding Social Security, my daughter's father is retired. She's getting Social Security till she's 18. Does that count as income, hers or mine? Oof. Oof.
That's a good question. I think it's going to count probably as income to the child.
Okay. Let's see. Maybe you want to explain a little bit more about appeals. I said a little bit about, that you should put in other colleges' offers if you have other colleges that are giving more money, that it's important to include those offers when you're asking for money, is asking for a reconsideration. Is that true or false?
It's true. That's what I think the example I gave is that if you have two schools of which your kid's an equal candidate for, and both of them would want them, if one offers you 10,000 and one doesn't offer you anything, please feel free to say, my son or daughter wants to go to your school. Can you match this other school's offer? Their schools have entire departments currently dedicated to the issue of how much financial aid to offer a kid to try and get them to come. So there's lots of data going around, and that's why you should always appeal, because they know you're going to do it.
Okay, let's see. Do financial aids or grants just cover tuition?
I'm going to say the federal grants, the Pell Grant is only tuition, TAP is only tuition, but any school money is applied to the cost of attendance. So it's not just tuition, it's the cost of attendance, which is tuition, room and board, and other fees that the school has. So the need-based data in the school aid can be used for anything.
Okay, we're getting down there. Oh, this is a good one. How do scholarships play into the package year to year?
It's a good question. You got to be really careful of the bait and switch. Some schools are notorious that they'll offer you a lot first year, hook you in, and then not offer you so much next year. That's also an issue for an appeal. You can claim that I can't afford this other number. Can you match prior year's number? But just be careful about that. But since you'll be applying every year, we could just make a good case for whatever we need to make a case for. But just be careful about that. Most schools are pretty ethical about that, though.
I'm going to try this one. Okay. I have two. If you have two children in college, do you fill out the FAFSA twice? I vote yes, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
How's
the chat looking, Mrs. Tomine?
It looks pretty good. I think we're answering a lot of questions. I'll add one question, which is if a child, did you already ask this, Cindy? If a child is emancipated, does it make a difference?
Cindy's guess?
Oh, I would think it would, but they're emancipated, right? Like legally? Yeah, I would think so.
I agree.
Oh
Emancipated students are actually pretty set when it comes to financial aid, because usually they don't have that much income. So it's actually a good thing for them to be emancipated.
Another one is, if my child is committed now as a junior to a school, should I fill out the forms and go through the process now?
Yes. Because there's probably money for you.
Okay, and then another question, I'm just going to wrap up into one. There were quite a few, was what the process is for applying. So when you mentioned merit versus grants versus, the other components of a financial aid package, do you apply for them separately or at different times, or is it done all in one swoop?
It's done in one foul swoop. Filing the forms to the schools and the government, they automatically make all their resources considered, so it's not separate for this, separate for that. You don't need to know it's just one process. The school will offer up what they can offer up, but you don't have to do form once for this type of aid or this type of aid. It's just one time.
And if you're class of 2023, so in other words, you're a junior currently in this year, should you fill out the forms now?
No, you want to wait until the year they become open for that school year. So it wouldn't be till next October 1st. But I would, for that family, I would pay attention to what your income is going to be this year to see if there's anything you can do to lower it, because it's this year's income that'll be inputted to next year's form.
Okay. We have an education account under my husband's and my name. Is that considered an asset?
It's a parent asset.
Okay. What if a child receives Social Security disability because a parent is on disability? Is that counted as income for the child? I would say yes. It's the same as the 18, right?
No, I think it's like a parent asset because the parent reports it on their income tax.
Okay. And I think that's picked up by the IRS retrieval tool. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Do you recommend early decision applications if a child is set on a school with an ED and their grades and scores are such that the school is not a reach school? Would we not get any merit aid because we're contracted to come?
Two things to that. Number one, I would, if your child really likes that school, I would consider doing early decision. A lot of schools, the early decision acceptance rate is higher than the regular decision acceptance rate. And the second thing to know is that you'll still be offered up, they'll still evaluate you for student aid. They won't necessarily penalize you because you decided to go early decision. But the one thing you need to know is that if you do apply early decision and they offer you a financial aid package that isn't working for you, you can deny that early decision acceptance. So we always talk about ED being binding, but it's only binding to the event that you can afford it.
Well, I got to say, we've been pretty lucky in my 27 years in Yorktown. I don't think we've had anybody back out of an ED. So, hopefully the schools work with the parents because doing that actually has ramifications for the following year's acceptances if someone backs out of an ED. So hopefully you've exhausted everything before you back out of that. Let's see. Okay, parent number one and parent number two feels like a word problem. Parent number one plus parent number two income does not equal adjusted gross income as parent number one got unemployment this year. Do you add it to that parent's income? Do you add it to that parent's income? I say IRS retrieval tool.
Yes, that information will be uploaded from the IRS data retrieval tool.
I can't talk highly enough about IRS retrieval tool. Is it a good idea to emancipate your child just for college purposes? I don't think you can do that, can you?
You can. We kid around in the thing that the two things that are great are emancipate them and get them married. Because if you're married, you're automatically considered emancipated. So in theory, it works if you can document the paperwork to make it real emancipation or get them married.
Okay, I'm very excited about the IRS retrieval tool. I just can't explain it to one of the parents by text. Could you just go over that again? Because it is super important. It keeps you sane through this process.
It makes your life a lot easier. The one thing about the IRS data retrieval tool, the only time really not to use it is if you have a qualified IRA rollover, because the information gets inputted wrong. So if that happens to you in any given year, don't use the data retrieval tool, do it yourself. Old-fashioned school input it. But the IRS data retrieval tool is that there are a bunch of questions on the FAFSA that pertain to your taxes and your income status. And they want that information from your tax forms. So instead of pulling out your tax paper, filling it in by hand, there's just one button you click, bing, on the FAFSA form, and it inputs it directly from the IRS. So it saves a lot of time and headaches. It's usually very accurate. It's very rare for it to be wrong, except in the instance of if you had a qualified IRA rollover, in which case you have that in any given year, you're better off inputting them in information manually. Hope that answers that question.
I think we're coming towards the end of our hour. We do want to be respectful of everybody's time. We know it's been a long week for everyone. I guess I will end it with kind of the dovetail on that, so to speak, in terms of what's available at the high school for folks outside of the traditional process in FAFSA. Ms. Servini, I don't know if you want to talk about the scholarship binder and other opportunities that families and students can look into.
Sure. We have a scholarship binder on, it's actually part of the Naviance program, and it's also a live binder in the office. So every time we get either a national scholarship or even a local, Dr. Sheckman used to do scholarships, Coca-Cola does scholarships. We will make copies of them and of the flyers and put them in that binder. We'll also advertise them on Naviance. So there is, as Dr. Sheridan pointed out, a lot of money out there. Every year we meet as a department because outside agencies will contact us, like a Dr. Sheckman or the Marine Corps, or just a whole bunch of different Brendan Frail scholarship. Mrs. Frail's always been very kind with the scholarship money that they raised in memory of students and in memory of parents. And faculty members contribute money. So all this is put together in May. We have an awards night, and counselors start meeting in February and March to talk about their students. And we get ugly, we fight for our students, but it's very helpful that your student does on Naviance. There's a resume, because for a lot of our counselors, they'll have 40, 50 seniors, and they need to know who's applying for education, who did volunteer work for this particular organization, and it's helpful for us. So there's definitely those resources. FastWeb always talks about scholarships. They have scholarship opportunities there. So those are just a few of the examples.
Lisa, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. So I will shamelessly plug the PTSA again. We appreciate your membership, your donations, so that we can continue to provide programming and partner with the schools to bring valuable information. Thank you so much, Dr. Sheridan, for all the great information. We will definitely be sharing a link to the recording, and Ms. Servini also referenced the link of some resources that are available through HESC, and we will be sharing that in an email as well tomorrow. I do want to take one quick minute to plug the next in the series, which is the ACT versus SAT, how to decide which test to take. I know that's a question that students and parents are commonly wondering about. So that'll take place on December 13th. We will share the registration link to that as well, and we hope you will join. Please be on TikTok, be on Twitter for the guidance, as well as the PTSA and Mr. DeGennaro, because all of this information will be shared through that as well. So with that, I will say thank you to everybody for joining. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you on the 13th. Have a great night.
Thank you.